listening to the best of the Martha Zoller Show. To hear the full show each day, tune in to AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN or log in to accesswdun.com and click the Listen Live button from 9 to 11, Monday through Friday. Adam Goodman is joining me. He is the host of 13th and Park and also has been involved in politics as a strategist for a very long time, and we appreciate him being back with us. Hey, Adam, how are you?
I'm doing great. Great to be on the show. Love your show. And wow, what interesting times we live in.
Yeah, so let's talk first about these confirmation hearings that are starting today. And, of course, local boy done good, Doug Collins, is today. He is up for Veterans Affairs Secretary, and so we'll be following that very closely. But Pete Hegseth starts today, too. So give us your thoughts, and I'll just tell you what I think. I think Pete's got the votes, that it's going to be a fiery confirmation hearing, but I think he's got the votes, and as long as he keeps his cool, he'll be fine.
Well, right before I got on the show today, I was, like so many Americans, watching the Hegseth hearing. And 3 times, as Pete Hegseth was going through his introductory remarks, people in the crowd erupted in protest, individuals, and had to be taken out of the room. So it's going to be a hot confirmation. Here's the bottom line. If Pete Hegseth is confirmed, and I think there's every reason to believe he will be, but it's not going to be without a real contentious hearing. If he's confirmed, I think that means that literally every one of the major appointees put up for confirmation by President Trump will likely be confirmed as well. In other words, we're gonna know whether or not this is going to be a smooth confirmation process overall or not by what happens with Pete Hegseth today.
Yeah, and I agree with you about that. And I think that what's interesting, too, is that I was listening to some audio today from the new owner of the LA Times, and he was talking about how he'd been a Democrat all his life, but that he was not going to vote for people anymore that didn't have business experience, and that whether that's Donald Trump, who he ended up voting for this time, or whoever, he's looking for people with business experience. And, of course, he's in Los Angeles and L.A. and dealing with this whole fire thing and just beside himself that nobody seems to know what to do. And so I think what we're seeing across the board is that you have a very diverse group of picks that Donald Trump has put together. They're not all, and I've often said Donald Trump is not a Republican, okay? He is his own thing. He is a conservative. I think he is a conservative, but he's a businessman first. And he's put together a wide range of people that aren't all from one ideology. So I think it's the most interesting cabinet I've seen in a long time.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that's obvious. This slate of nominees are united in one thing. It's called common purpose. Instead of just looking at resumes and pulling what you think are the best resumes of the best individuals and then submitting those for confirmation, what the president learned from his first term was how important it is that the team he puts on the field all believes essentially in the same mission. And the mission he has made very clear here, Martha, is that he wants to change the way government does business fundamentally. And it took maybe a whole first term in office to understand just how to do that and what the forces arrayed against him are like and how to take them on. And he's taking them on, full square, taking them on every day by challenging them to defend a system that most Americans are really down about. That really, in poll after poll, you see 7 in 10 Americans say they've had it with the status quo. Well, you're about to see what change really looks like, and it will be led by a full team of people who believe in that as their central mission.
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting, too, is that you hear a very different Donald Trump, where the other day he was asked by Peter Doocy about, that he's got these 4 or 5 Democrats that have come to visit him, and, have they changed or have you changed? And he very magnanimously said, I think we've all changed through this. Yeah. And I think that in a very strange way, this 4 years out of office has been the best thing for Donald Trump.
I remember you saying that on 13th and Park on my show.
Yeah.
And you were right then and you're right now. I think he learned a lot. I think you're right. I think it takes that perspective sometimes to know more how to move forward. And sometimes it takes looking back to understand how to move forward. I think the president has done that. I think we are looking at a different Donald Trump, by the way. It's very obvious. I think he's got his feet more squarely on the ground. He's got a clearer perspective, I think, on how to get things done. And I think the cabinet picks really reflect that in a big way. And these are some real heavyweights, in my opinion. People like Pam Bondi. I mean, Pam is she's not only made for television, she's central casting for Attorney General. She's been boots on the ground as Attorney General in Florida. She's handled some of the most difficult cases one could ever imagine. She is supported wildly by law enforcement, firefighters, and other first responders. She is the kind of person you want. And what's nice about all of that about her, Martha, she can bring in terms of articulating a message that people can understand, relate to, and want to follow.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And I think that what's interesting about her is that she was I wish she had been the choice from the beginning, but people have even forgotten that Matt Gaetz was even nominated, I think, at this point in time. And so I think that having her in there will be fantastic. I think as far as my conservative side of the way I look at issues, the biggest one I'm concerned about is RFK Jr. And not that I don't think he could do a great job, and I love what he's talking about, keeping America healthy. And I do believe, as the mother of as someone who raised children in the 90s, there was something bad in our food during that period of time, because a lot of my kids and the people that they know have a lot of, there is definitely a higher incidence of colon cancer. There's definitely a higher incidence of all these other kind of gut-related problems. And so I like that about him. I don't worry about the vaccine discussion, because I do think that he is just looking for accountability there. As a conservative, the only thing I'm concerned about is he's pro-choice. And he's kind of pro-choice up until birth. And that bothers me, but I'm not saying I would oppose him. I'm just saying, for me, he is the pick that gives me the most heartburn.
He is a fascinating pick, Martha, right? I mean, for all the reasons you just articulated and then some. But what we're going to find in his hearing, of all the hearings, that's the one I look forward to the most. It has, in a way,
he's brilliant. Well, he's brilliant.
He is, and he's very different, and he is so willing to take on the status quo and to take on assumptions and to take on the establishment. I think and he'll get the tough questions. He should, by the way, because the bottom line is, he is the person most responsible for the health of this nation, literally, for our personal health. And so we want to know what he feels about these various issues. On the vaccines, he's already made it very clear. He has a perspective on that, which is shared by many, by the way, but is not out to deny choice. If someone wants to take a vaccine, even if he has his own qualms about it, that's their call. Right. As opposed to what happened after COVID, which was a forced mandate that eliminated choice for everybody.
Yeah, I tell you, the local hospital here, which is the largest employer, as in many communities, your hospital is the largest employer. They actually, under a lot of pressure, because they're part of a network that's in Metro Atlanta, and all the Metro Atlanta hospitals were requiring everybody to get the COVID vaccine. They took a position here at this hospital with 13,000 employees, or maybe more now, that they were down 1,000 people just about every day during COVID because of requirements related to sickness and illness and that kind of stuff. And so they did not require their employees to get the COVID vaccine. They do require the flu vaccine, but they do not require the COVID vaccine. And they were able to get through, because she said, I couldn't afford losing another 300 or 400 people at a time when we needed every single person, all hands on deck in our hospital system. COVID was a very scary time for all of us. When you're presented or confronted with the unknown,
and the unknown can have such consequence. It becomes very, very emotional very, very quickly. But what was even scarier was the idea that basic freedom and individual choice was going to be subverted to the state, and that the state was being represented by individuals who were basically lording over us, that they knew better than we did. That they were smarter than we are, right?
Look,
about this.
My husband's an old primary care physician, and so, I totally buy into the idea of a relationship with your doctor. So I now he's retired from private practice now, and so I have a primary care doctor. And we made the decision together. My doctor and I made the decision together about whether I was going to get the vaccine or not, because I had a lung infection that was not related to COVID a couple of months before the vaccine came out. And we made and I was very sick, and we made the decision, hey, you don't need to run the risk of getting another lung problem right now. So I think you should take the vaccine. And so I did. I took the vaccine. I took the first booster. I haven't done any of the other boosters because they haven't convinced me that they work any better than what you had already. So that was the decision I made, but I made that decision with my doctor based on my own medical history. And that's the way it ought to be.
It's exactly the way it ought to be. And getting back to RFK Jr. for a second, the interesting thing about him is when someone comes to him and says, this is the way it should be done, this is the way it's always been done, you know what he's going to do. He's going to push back and say, why? Why has it always been done this way? Why must it be done this way? Are there other alternatives we haven't considered? Or is this just basically the healthcare establishment that is leaning heavily on us to go a certain way, and stop asking the questions we must always ask if we are to preserve the health of this nation?
Well, and ultimately, he is the pick of Donald Trump, and he is going to follow the agenda that Donald Trump has. And I think, ultimately, I'll be watching that one too very closely, Adam, because I think that's going to be the most interesting, because it is a bigger department than even defense, and the control that you have. And look, we need to revise Medicare. We need to look and bring into the 21st century many of the services that are being provided. We're not doing things the most efficient way in America. We do have the best health care available, but we don't deliver it in the most efficient way, and we need to get back to that. Adam Goodman, tell folks about 13th and Park before I let you go.
13th and Park is a show that profiles leaders and decision makers and influencers all over the country. It is an open, honest, balanced format where we're trying to get information out to people so we can leave it up to them to decide what to do with it. It's been going on. We're in our third season now. A couple of our recent guests are up for nomination for cabinet positions and others. We are pleased as heck to be a part of the conversation, like you, Martha, to help move America forward.
Adam Goodman, thank you so much for being with us today.
Take care.
It's where North Georgia comes to talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
It is the Martha Zoller Show. Joining me right now is Roger Gewolb. We get together with him every other week. And while there is a lot of news happening back in the UK, the whole world is focused on the Trump transition, and we're already seeing changes and looks and concerns from other world leaders on how it is going to affect them. Roger, welcome to the program. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you very much, Martha.
So in a very strange way, I think this 4 years that Donald Trump has had off has been good for him. I love that he's got Susie Wiles heading up as the chief of staff. And you know what? I think we're in for a very exciting time.
Well, I think more than exciting, Martha, I think productive and remedial, renewable. There's, just so much that's wrong. So many things pointing in the wrong direction. I think he's going to be able to put most of those right. I mean, Nick Clegg out of Meta, thank goodness. He's telling the British Prime Minister Starmer, who's got the lowest popularity rating since Jack the Ripper, to get rid of the windmills in the North Sea. Windmills, I like that. He's going to tell everybody what to do, and they're going to listen to him. And the first thing, of course, I'm just waiting to see what he's going to do about Gaza, because this agreement is falling apart. Once again, they said just on the news here in London a minute ago that Hamas has backed out of some part. I don't know what they did or what they said or what part they backed out of, but that was announced a moment before your program started.
Yeah, and there's been some talk about it
later. And Trump is then going to step in because he said all hell's going to break loose, and I can imagine a whole scenario of things he's going to do.
Well, and what's so crazy is that you make this deal with people that you shouldn't make deals with. You shouldn't deal with terrorists, which is what Hamas is, and you've got a situation where they didn't keep the deals they made back in November of 2023. There are people that should have been released then that weren't, and now you think you can do the same kind of thing where you have this staged kind of thing. And then the head of Hamas, I don't know, the third, fourth, or fifth person, because they've killed most of the other ones, gets out and says that October 7th will always be a great day in our history. And you're right that Netanyahu has delayed the vote on the agreement, and I guarantee you there is a lot of discussion going on right now that's going to make this either happen or to his point, there will be hell to pay.
Well, what I just said was not that Netanyahu delayed it. It's that Hamas delayed it is what the news headline was, but I had to leave to come on here.
But Netanyahu has delayed the vote as a result of that. So that's
correct.
The second part.
What they said is the Israeli government did not hold the vote because Hamas has backed out of certain terms, and that's when I cut off listening to what they were saying.
Yes, so. Absolutely. Well, it's a fluid situation, that's for sure. And, I just want to see, these are not prisoners of war. They are hostages. There was peace on October 6th, and these people were taken out of their homes at 6:30 in the morning on October 7th, and they should have been freed. How could this have been over if they had freed them in November? They had freed them all back then this would have never happened. I put all of this at the feet of Hamas.
Yeah, well, I think that, all the things that people are waiting to see from the Trump effect, the first one is going to be what he does about Gaza, unless they make this deal.
Yeah, absolutely. That, Ukraine, also, look, the Biden administration is doing everything they can. There's a... California did this vote while the wildfires were going to Trump-proof California. Well, Biden's been doing this backhanded stuff in his final days to try to make things more difficult for Donald Trump. But the fact of the matter is, sure, things will be more difficult, but he's going to keep working towards the positive. And as things start to turn around, this from leadership, Roger, is that when you have good leadership, it's not just about what the leaders do. The leaders inspire the population to start taking risks, to start acting in positive ways, and starting to move themselves forward. And by doing that, that's what turns the corner. It's not just the leader. It is the leader making some progress and then making you and me feel like we can take risks again.
Well, that's the definition of leadership. That's very well said, Martha. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what's got to happen here. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think that Donald Trump, and, there are things that I didn't like about how he handled things after the last election, okay? But I think he has earned his way back, and the voters have said they don't care about it. The voters have said they want him to lead them again, and the Democrats are tone deaf. You look at these confirmation hearings, and they're still focused on 2020 and trying to get people to, admit there was no election fraud. And the voters have clearly said they don't care about that they want the country to be better.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think I spoke to a fellow television presenter in the studio the other day, and he said, "I'm just feeling better and better every day."
I know, me too. Me too. I really am. I think it's going to be a great 4 years. I think that there'll be a lot of work to do. I think that if the Democrats keep going down this path of being totally tone deaf as to why they lost, then 2026 is going to be a good year too.
Yeah, definitely.
But the fact of the matter is, he's got to get a lot done here in a short period of time. And
I'm sure he can do it, and he's got a great team.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me, what is there's a lot of news coming out of the UK also related to investigations around what's called grooming gangs. There's a lot of problems that Keir Starmer seems to have. I mean, this is like your third prime minister or fourth prime minister in the last 3 years. So what's going on with him?
Yeah. Well, he's just so bad and so unpopular, and he's wooden, and he just doesn't get it. And all the people around him are pretty useless. His Treasury Secretary, that they call the Chancellor here, is probably going to be fired any moment. He's going to dump her because she's such an embarrassment. She's caused the price of the UK's borrowings to shoot up. She's lied allegedly about a number of things in her background, and she's not impressive, not trusted. A lot of people around him are just they're a bunch of socialists all running around spouting, outdated nonsense, and they're really unpopular. And many people just wanted another election soon. They were voted in, by what he calls a landslide, but it's really by apathy, because only 20% of the public voted for them. That's how they got in. People just couldn't be bothered. And he's so much worse than what we had before with the Conservatives, which was really awful. So we're in a real pickle here.
Well, hopefully we'll all turn the corner here soon. Roger Gewolb, you can follow Roger in numerous places. He's on Twitter. He is posting things. YouTube, all of that. So we look forward to
LinkedIn.
You're everywhere.
Yeah, everywhere.
Everywhere. No signs of slowing down. You and Donald Trump, no signs of slowing down.
No way.
Putting the talk in news talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Greg Bluestein is joining us from the AJC, and he's one of the political reporters, one of the best-known political reporters. And, of course, we had the State of the State address. And as a fiscal conservative, Greg, I loved what I heard, but let's just make it a round number and drop it to 5%. What's this 5.19%?
It is a gradual shaving, right? And it's going to cost about $1 billion over the next 2 years. But Georgia has a $16.5 billion cash reserve right now. And this is what Governor Kemp has always said he's going to use to spend it. He does not want long-term spending programs that could hamstring the state down the line. Instead, he wants to do a lot of these tax cuts and one-off programs, like spending money to build new infrastructure.
Well, I'm sure you remember back when Governor Deal was kind of getting out of the height of the recession and the Great Recession, and I think we got down to like $100 million in the reserves, something like that. I mean, it was just crazy. And I know that the idea is to have about 10% of what the budget is, which would be about $3.5 billion. So we've got that plus the rainy day fund. I mean, we're in great shape fiscally, and I love the fact that he's doing a combination of infrastructure type things, security, fully funding education, but also doing this, giving the money back, because it's a tax cut and a rebate, correct?
Yeah, so there's a $1 billion rebate that he announced back in October. Now, there's that new $1 billion tax cut he just announced yesterday, and then you add to that $1 billion or so in infrastructure funding. That's $3 billion right there. But as you said, Martha, even if you take that out of a surplus, you still have, you're still in a very good fiscal shape. You still have billions of dollars, $13, $12 billion in the surplus beyond that.
So there was a little drama, probably not inside the chamber, but outside the chamber. If just to set it up for people, what led to the drama of Senator Colton Moore? Because there was things that happened last year that actually led up to this. Just give people a quick thumbnail and then tell us what happened yesterday.
Yeah, back in 2023, actually, Colton Moore was exiled from the Republican Senate caucus for berating his colleagues over a special session to oust Fonnie Willis from office, which is something lawmakers can't do. Then the day that the late House Speaker David Ralston was being honored in the Georgia Capitol with a new portrait, he took the well of the Senate and berated and attacked the former Speaker's legacy. That upset House leaders who banned him from going onto the floor of the House chambers. Well, that's a problem only 1 or 2 days a year, right? Because he's a senator, so he doesn't have to go to the House floor that often. But days like yesterday when the governor gives a State of the State speech, that is a joint session of the General Assembly in the Georgia House. So we at the AJC kind of saw this coming and started asking questions about it a couple of days ago. We wrote a story about it 2 days ago saying this could be a standoff. I asked Colton Moore yesterday morning before all this, are you willing to get arrested? And he said, yep, I'm willing to get arrested. So basically there was efforts behind the scenes to kind of diffuse the situation. They didn't go anywhere. Colton Moore walks up with the rest of his Senate colleagues to try to get into the center doors of the House chamber and is immediately blocked by several House officials surrounded by Georgia State Patrol officers. I was right there, Martha. I took video of the whole thing happening and was reporting on it. And it was a very awkward scene. You know, we saw the Colton Moore kind of fall to the ground at one point. There was a little shoving match. There was no fisticuffs. There was no, he was very careful about what he was doing because he didn't want to, he didn't raise his hands in violence or anything like that. He was basically trying to use his body weight to kind of sidle past House officials. And at each time, there was one doorkeeper who was kind of built like a lineman, and he was blocking him at every turn. So it was a publicity stunt. But this was not a surprise what happened. We had even reported a day earlier it was going to happen. But it has provoked a lot of back and forth, a lot of backlash on the Speaker's decision to continue that ban.
Well, I tell you, I think that I was disappointed to see it happen because I think it could have been easily avoided. But I think that the truth is Colton Moore didn't want to avoid it. Okay, so and when you said his Senate colleagues, are you saying the whole Republican caucus was behind him, or was it just a few people?
Oh, what I meant by the Senate colleagues is all the senators were just kind of filing in a line
Got it.
to the chambers. And actually, Colton Moore was not far behind Burt Jones, the lieutenant governor, in that lineup. But immediately he was kind of singled out by House officials and kind of pushed to the side for a little bit. And so it was this very awkward scene of Senate Republicans and Democrats filing one by one into the chamber for this big event, right? This is the governor's landmark speech of the year. It definitely got overshadowed by all this kerfuffle outside. But they were kind of walking by Colton Moore as he was in this very long, the videos you guys might have seen were only a minute or two, but this whole thing went on for 10, 15 minutes outside.
Well, and I tell you what's interesting to me is, okay, we just had the death of Jimmy Carter. Okay. And there are some stories I could tell about Jimmy Carter that I have firsthand knowledge of that weren't very nice stories. Okay. Mm-hmm. But I did not take this moment during the time we were remembering Jimmy Carter to tell those stories. Okay. Because there's just certain things you do and you don't do when someone has passed. I think that what people forget is what led up to this was Colton Moore kind of going after David Ralston in front of his family in this particular situation. So, for me, I'm a Republican, but I don't agree with the Republican chairman on this. I don't agree with the kind of lackluster statement that Lieutenant Governor Jones made. I think the reason why this wasn't solved ahead of time is because Colton Moore didn't want to solve it. John Burns may have been a portion, but I think that if Moore had gone to Burns and said, hey, I'm sorry about what happened, but it could have been avoided. I think he did it for the publicity. I think this YouTube video from the hospital was hysterical, only because I took a fall a few days ago where I had to brace myself with my hand, and I have a bruised hand right now. I didn't go to the hospital. Okay? Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of gamesmanship going on here that is unnecessary and unhelpful to the Republican majority in what they're going to try to get done.
Well, two things there. Of course, I agree in terms of this could have been avoided. The Speaker sat down with Colton Moore, Senator Moore, a couple days ago, and we have the letter that he produced for Colton Moore, and it essentially asked him, if you can, we will lift this ban if you issue a sincere apology to the family of David Ralston, who you maligned. He said you used vile, derogatory, and false statements about him, disparaging instead of derogatory, actually. And that if you issue a sincere apology, this will be lifted. And we asked Colton Moore how that meeting went. He said we ended it agreeing to disagree. And on your second point, Martha, I mean, this was, again, supposed to be this banner day for Governor Kemp, announcing this tax shave, announcing, reminding lawmakers of the $1 billion in infrastructure spending that is in his budget proposal, and also putting them on notice that he wants some version of tort reform to pass this year, even if it takes a special session. So this is a very newsy speech, and yet it's overshadowed by this brouhaha outside the chambers.
Yeah, and so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. And don't forget also that Colton Moore raised money and spent it against former Senator Shelley Eccles and Senator Bo Hatchett in their districts because he didn't agree with how he was doing things. So he's not a team player, right? But they have put him back on a committee that one insider in the Senate said is a nothing committee. They've allowed him to be the chairman of, I think, Interstate Commerce Committee or something like that because he's got the inland port up there near his district. It's not in his district, but it's near his district. And that they have tried to bring him back into the fold in the Senate, but they're keeping him at arm's length. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I think it's a blip because the agenda that, as you pointed out, the agenda that the governor put out was quite aggressive.
Yeah. From what we understand, we were told that the exile, that he is still banished from the Georgia Republican Senate caucus. That was something that Republican senators decided upon, as you mentioned, after he personally went after Senators Eccles and Hatchett. And Martha, not only did he go after them, like he put their phone numbers out there for social media. He went into what many feel a step too far.
He doxed them, there's a lot as the term is, right? He doxed them. Yeah. I think he said where they live, too.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of internal clashing. Democrats don't all get along. Republicans don't all get along. But that put it to a different level. So from what we understand, that exile continues. Of course, there might be times where they really need that vote because there'll be some really tough issues. So they don't want to, it's a tricky situation. They don't want to completely, make him a pariah. But I think to many people in that caucus, he is a pariah. And that was an unwelcome distraction to both House Republicans and Senate Republicans. When I asked Democrats where they felt, I asked Carolyn Hughley, the House Minority Leader, and she said, when elephants fight, you just watch. So Democrats are kind of getting their popcorn out.
There's been dramatic things. I've forgotten the senator's name. I think it was Vincent Fort, where he walked into the chamber, hitting himself with chains and acting, there's drama that happens on both sides, but right now it's on the Republican side.
Yeah, and Republicans are in power, so you expect a little bit more of that, too. There's dissension in the ranks. But I think the most outside of that brouhaha, Martha, the most telling thing that happened yesterday was when the governor said, no matter what happens, whether it takes a session or a special session, we are going to pass tort reform. There's audible gasps and a lot of cheers, but there's audible gasps in that House chamber because he is putting a lot of his capital on the line.
That's some of the strongest language I've ever heard him use. I mean, in a speech like that. You know what I mean? Because he's usually the guy that gets along with everybody. But you'll have a lot to do, and I'll be seeing you down there, and we'll be talking a lot throughout the session, Greg. Greg Bluestein, thank you so much for being with us today.
See you soon.
It's local radio, and that's why you're listening. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
We are talking to Insurance Commissioner John King. And, John, it's always great to get together with you. How are you? And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Martha. I really appreciate the opportunity to to have this conversation. We were very proud, and we've got a lot of work done early in this year, especially with the open enrollment.
Yes, and so that's what we wanted to talk about today because, look, I own a small business. We have a small a small group of our workers that we provide health insurance for, and that, especially in that small business market, it is harder and harder and harder to provide insurance because a lot of people don't want to do small groups anymore the way they used to. And so the Georgia Health Access, or Georgia Access, which is a private health marketplace, is part of a kind of a two-pronged approach that Georgia is doing now to provide insurance to people that aren't able to get it.
Absolutely. We've done something truly remarkable in Georgia. First of all, through Governor Kemp and the legislature, we pulled out of the Affordable Care Act, which was really not serving the needs of Georgians. And so we established a marketplace where private health companies would compete for Georgia consumers in their business. And as a result, we've been able to sign up over 1.5 million Georgians for private health insurance coverage, which is superior, vastly superior than government-run insurance. And we have 225,000 new customers who've never had insurance before. So we're surpassing all records. We've outperformed any other state in the nation, and we outperform in many metrics the ACA, which is run out of Washington.
Yeah, I mean, I was excited to see those numbers because it got off to a slow start. I think that's fair to say, right? And
yes.
Now it looks like people understand it's there. They know how to use it. The dashboard's very easy to use. So who is Georgia Access really? What do people need to know about that, and who is it targeted to?
It is really targeted to the people who don't get employer supported health care. Is that individual contractor, that employee that doesn't, who works for a small company that doesn't get enough, salary to be able to get provided health care coverage from their employer. And so there's a lot of folks out there, and you touched on what we want to grow this now. Is now the next phase of this is we want to go after the small group, the small companies, 25 below, 50 below, that don't make enough money to be able to provide healthcare coverage. But if we can provide coverage, additional money to that employee so they can go shop for healthcare on this marketplace, and the employer then gets a tax incentive for providing those additional dollars. That is what we're really trying to grow it next. Because
would that require
success.
John, would that require more legislation to be able to do that, or are the rules in place to be able to do that now?
It will require some of and we are addressing that legislation this session. We're going to the legislature, making the case that the true gap that we're having is small group, small employers. They need a little bit of an incentive to be able to provide those additional dollars so employees can get covered with insurance. And I think we've had an effective case, and it's been received rather well by the legislature, and we're going to have to develop it we have to make the business case like every other, form of a program in the state. Georgia has a high threshold, and we have to make the business case. We don't need to be burdening, the taxpayers with additional government, programs.
Yeah, and the governor did announce in his State of the State yesterday there's a couple of areas where Medicaid he is going to be expanded. One of my big issues being on the kind of provider side as well, my husband used to be a primary care physician. He still is, but he doesn't have a private office anymore. But one of the big challenges he had with Medicaid was they don't pay in a timely manner. And so if you have a lot of Medicaid patients, that creates some problems with your cash flow and that sort of thing in the office. And that's not the person's fault. That's just the way the system runs. And I think that what you've got also, to your point, there are these people that are not necessarily low-income people. They wouldn't qualify for Medicaid, but they don't have enough money They don't make enough money to be truly in the private market, which is very expensive. So the Georgia Access, I think, gives them an opportunity to really shop the private market, but in a way that they can afford it.
Absolutely. Martha, 95% of the people that got insurance through Georgia Access were eligible for subsidies. I mean, and so that is exactly the target audience that we're going to. Folks, what I call the working poor, the folks that don't make enough money to get, group insurance, but folks in the individual market, they're looking for coverage. And these programs are far superior than what Medicaid would provide. Our doctors like it because they get compensated on a timely basis. They get fair compensation. Our rural hospitals like it because they're getting timely and accurate compensation for the services they're provided. You know that if insurance doesn't cover these costs, then the rest of us have to cover it through additional taxes to support our small rural hospitals.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to be watching closely just because in our business we have we're predominantly female. It's just the way it works out. It's a nursing business. We certainly have some men that work for us, but a lot of the women have their insurance through their husbands. So we have a very small group. It's 4 or 5 nurses that need coverage that we provide or that we try to provide for them. And it's given us some additional options to be able to look at. We did ultimately end up getting it in the private market, but it was a last-minute kind of thing, and had we not been armed with the information we were able to get out of Georgia Access about some other plans that were available, we wouldn't have been able to do it. So it's a great tool, and I'm so glad to hear that the numbers are growing exponentially because it was a hard message to get out initially, but it's an important one.
It's truly extraordinary. And Martha, the solution that what makes us different in the federal program is that we understand the Georgia market, and we're going to where places are gathering. We're not expecting people to come to us. We're going to Gainesville, to North Georgia, and talking to folks, and using agents who understand the products. We don't expect people to go to a website and get the solutions. We have up to 1,200 consumer service specialists standing by, calling folks, providing them information. So if you don't understand the website or the website is confusing, just pick up the phone and call our folks. And even if you started your application, you didn't complete it, we have folks calling people back. And I say, hey, do you have any questions? Do you have any problems? Are you having any obstacles? We have folks there to help resolve and help people, because I know this is complicated.
Now, on another subject, just one more question. Obviously, you've been watching what's been happening over in California with the wildfires, and there's a lot of talk about insurance and people being covered. When something like that happens, as insurance commissioner, do you get reached out to by people across the country to see if there can be any help that other insurance commissioners can give? Or does that give you a kind of a way you need to look at the Georgia market to be sure we don't run into the same kind of problems? Because I'm sure with the hurricanes that came through, you've had a lot of property damage issues that have been happening.
Well, but the answer to both your questions is yes. First of all, I talked to the commissioner of insurance in California. I know him, but they are victims of a lot of their liberal policies. They did not allow any rate increases, even the modest ones, and so companies pulled out of their state because no company is going to operate in the state if the regulatory environment is just crushing them. Large insurance companies that said, look, we're not going to do business in this state because, first of all, the regulatory, the regulations make it just impossible to operate. And so we look very carefully at our policies. We review all the data to make sure that we have adequate insurance and that our companies are in solid financial shape. Right now, they're in deep trouble in California because they have a state-based insurance program, which is called basically their insurance of last resort, and they don't have enough money in that entity to be able to pay the many of the costs of this disaster. And so that means that the taxpayers of California are going to take a great deal of burden in rebuilding. On top of that, they have the bureaucracy of getting permits to be able to rebuild is crushing. And they're going to have to do some major reforms in that state to get back on their feet.
Commissioner John King, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate you being with us.
Thank you, Martha. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and your audience, and we're here at your service.
To hear the full versions of last week's Martha Zoller shows, go to the podcast page at accesswdun.com, and you can follow me on social media at Martha Zoller.